This is a special edition of How to Fix It. This is going to be a fascinating conversation. The central premise is that Abraham Lincoln is gay.
Okay, I wanted to get this video in before Pride was over. This is conservative commentator John Avlon with the Bulwark, a conservative news and opinion organization. Ironically, John's show is called How to Fix It. And in this episode, where he discusses Lincoln's sexuality, nothing gets fixed except to continue the simplistic, predictable, homophobic reading of the 19th century and its sexuality and affection. I made a documentary called Lover of Men, The Untold History of Abraham Lincoln, where I interview Ivy League historians and Lincoln scholars to go through the evidence showing that Lincoln was in fact what we today would call queer. I also dive into how radically different sexuality was in the 19th century. Okay, let's get into it with John.
This is something that has been bandied about. The log cabin Republicans repair to this idea that somehow Lincoln was secretly gay. Joining me today is probably the preeminent and certainly most prolific Abraham Lincoln scholar, Harold Holzer.
So these guys start to talk about when people first started discussing Lincoln's sexuality. A lot of that focus has been on Lincoln's close, intimate relationship with his best friend, Joshua Speed, who he met in Springfield when he was 28.
There had been a book or two that indicated that the proof was there. Lincoln and Speed had an intimate relationship. Just quick background, they did sleep in the same bed in Springfield for a couple of years. Lincoln arrived looking for a place to live. Speed had a big bed. It was not uncommon then for guys who were bachelors and who were not wealthy to room together.
In my film, I go into great detail that Lincoln and Speed shared a bed for 4 years when Lincoln was 28 years old. 4 years. Now, perhaps at first Lincoln did it for financial reasons, but as a legislator and a successful lawyer, Lincoln would have been making at least $150,000 a year in today's money, more than enough to afford his own place. Yet he chose to sleep with Speed for 4 years. This tired excuse that Lincoln did it because he was poor has been debunked over and over again.
That term sleep together can just indicate sleeping, not sex. It's important.
Sleeping and not,
yes.
We assume not sex or, anyway.
Wait, why do you assume no sex? Why do you assume that? It was incredibly common for men to have intimacy in the 19th century. Again, watch the film. It is fascinating to see how fluid sexuality has been going way back to the Greeks and the Romans and before. There were no terms such as gay or straight in Lincoln's time. It was all about what felt good and leaning into your sexual impulses.
Lincoln had relations not just with Speed, but with other men. There was a story about a colonel who was discovered in Lincoln's bed when he was president and when Mary was away.
Holzer is actually referring to Captain David Derrickson, President Lincoln's bodyguard. He slept in Lincoln's bed at the summer White House during the Civil War. Derrickson also would wear Lincoln's nightshirts when they slept together in the bed.
This guy happened to have something like 9 children.
Okay, so having 9 children proves without a doubt you exclusively have sex with women. This is such a tired old trope. Can we think of any other queer men of history that also had children with women? Oscar Wilde, Herman Melville, Lord Byron, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Leonard Bernstein, all these guys were lover of men, and all of them had children with women. 9 children only proves that Captain Derrickson was like most men of the era, had children to help on the farm, had children to help with the family business, and also to strengthen the family's legacy. It doesn't prove that he also didn't like to be intimate with men.
He was keeping the president company in, kind of quasi-public view because people were in and out of the bedroom. Anyway, that's another story.
That's another story? That's all you have to say about Lincoln sleeping with his bodyguard? The story is that Lincoln is the president of the United States, overseeing the Civil War, and was openly sleeping with his bodyguard at the summer White House while his wife was out of town, over and over again. There were plenty of beds in the summer White House. There was no need to share. This situationship was described in detail by Derrickson's superior officer and also by the Secretary of the Navy's wife. Mr. Holzer's dismissiveness to historical evidence and his heterosexual bias is all too common. The old gatekeepers of history continue to skew the truth about Lincoln. I implore Mr. Avlon to watch Lover of Men, to see the evidence, to listen to the experts. Does Harold Holzer know a lot about the Civil War, about Lincoln's policies? Of course, he's probably the best. But is Mr. Holzer a historian on sexuality? No. That is not his area of expertise, but the Ivy League scholars I interview are. So please watch the film. Mr. Avlon, this episode of How to Fix It needs to be fixed.